It's past midnight. You have to be up in 6 hours. Your eyes ache. Your thoughts are slow and a little scattered. You are genuinely, physically tired. The kind of tired that builds across a whole day and settles into your bones by evening. And you are still awake. Not because something is keeping you up. Not because you can't sleep. You're lying there or sitting there, watching something you won't remember tomorrow, scrolling through something you barely care about. And some quiet part of you already knows exactly what's happening. You're making it worse. You know that. And you're doing it anyway. There's a name for this. Researchers call it revenge bedtime procrastination. And before you assume it's just a bad habit or a discipline problem or something that a stricter bedtime routine would fix, the psychology behind it points somewhere much more specific. Somewhere that explains not just what you're doing, but why it makes complete sense that you're doing it. 96% of Americans report doing this regularly, not occasionally after a rough week, regularly. Every other night on average, staying up nearly 2 hours past their intended bedtime, fully aware of the cost, fully aware, and still choosing the couch at midnight over the pillow. That's not a discipline failure at that scale. That's a signal, and the signal is worth paying attention to. The phrase itself comes from a Chinese social media term, bao fuxing ao ye, which translates roughly as retaliatory, staying up late. That word, retaliatory, is doing a lot of work. It's not describing someone who can't sleep. It's describing someone who won't sleep. Not yet, because the night is the only part of the day that belongs to them, and they are not ready to give it up. Dutch researcher Floor Kroes formally defined sleep procrastination in 2014 as failing to go to bed at the intended time while no external circumstances prevent a person from doing so. No insomnia. No emergency. Just a person who, despite being exhausted, chooses to stay awake. The revenge layer adds the missing piece. The staying awake is compensation. It is a response to something the day took. And to understand what was taken, you have to look at what a modern day actually asks of a person. Psychologists Richard Ryan and Edward Deci spent decades at the University of Rochester studying what humans fundamentally need. Not want, not prefer, but need in the same category as food and rest. They identified three: competence, relatedness, and autonomy. Autonomy, in their framework, is not the same as independence. It doesn't mean being alone or being free from obligations. It means the experience of acting from genuine choice, the feeling that what you're doing reflects something you actually decided, not just something you were required to do. That you are, in some meaningful sense, the author of your own behavior. When that need goes unmet, the research is clear. Well-being declines, motivation deteriorates, and people begin to seek compensation in whatever domain still offers them a felt sense of choice. Now think about a standard workday. 8, 9, 10 hours of tasks determined largely by external demands, meetings you didn't schedule, deadlines you didn't set, requests that arrived in your inbox and couldn't really be declined. Then the commute, or the shift into domestic obligations, dinner, kids, the emails that followed you home, the low-grade, constant effort of being responsive to other people's needs. By the time 10 p.m. arrives, when was the last moment of the day that felt genuinely chosen, not reacted to, not fulfilled out of obligation, chosen? For a lot of people, the honest answer is, not recently. The day was lived almost entirely in response to external pressure, and the autonomy need, which has been building since morning, hasn't been touched. The night is the only unscheduled time, the only hours where there's no meeting to get to, no one to answer, nothing required. So the person stays in those hours, past tiredness, past reason. Because the alternative feels like surrendering the only thing in the whole day that was actually theirs. The revenge isn't really against sleep. It's against a day that demanded everything and returned nothing that felt freely chosen. But here's what most people never notice. The reason this doesn't just happen once and resolve itself. The reason it becomes a loop. The mechanism is called negative reinforcement. It's often confused with punishment, but it's the opposite. Negative reinforcement is when a behavior removes something unpleasant, and that removal makes the behavior more likely to happen again. Staying up late removes the specific discomfort of feeling like the day wasn't yours. The relief is real. The brain registers. This worked. Tomorrow night, when the same autonomy deprivation returns, and it will, the behavior recommends itself again, not as a conscious decision, but as a learned response, a reliable solution to a recurring problem. A 2022 systematic review of 39 studies in sleep medicine reviews found exactly this pattern. People were staying up because the psychological reward of personal time outweighed the known cost of lost sleep, at least in the moment. They weren't unaware of the consequences. They were making a real cost-benefit calculation in real time. And the immediate relief of reclaimed hours was winning over the abstract, distant cost of tomorrow's tiredness. There's a second layer to the loop that makes it harder to exit. Because revenge bedtime procrastination almost always involves a screen. And the screen is not neutral. Variable ratio reinforcement, the same mechanism behind slot machines, means that each scroll might produce something interesting. The brain's dopamine system activates in anticipation of unpredictable reward, so the phone doesn't just fill the time of the reclaimed night, it actively resists putting down. You're not just choosing to stay up, your phone is making sure that the night, once started, never quite feels finished. It doesn't look dramatic, but there's a third mechanism that makes this pattern particularly hard to break through willpower alone. And it involves the same resource you've been spending all day. Psychologist Roy Baumeister's research on ego depletion established that self-regulation draws from a limited cognitive resource. Every act of self-control across the day, resisting an impulse, making a decision, managing a response, holding focus under pressure, draws from the same reservoir, and that reservoir depletes. By 11 p.m., after a full day of professional demands, interpersonal management, decisions large and small, and the constant low-grade effort of being responsible, the prefrontal cortex is operating at its lowest capacity of the day. The part of the brain that would normally evaluate, I should go to sleep and translate that knowledge into action, is running on almost nothing. This creates a specific kind of perfect storm. The motivation to stay up is at its peak. The autonomy need has been accumulating for 16 hours. The capacity to override that motivation is at its lowest. Ego depletion has had all day to build, and the phone is providing variable reward reinforcement that bypasses deliberate decision-making entirely. This is why just decide to go to sleep earlier doesn't work as advice. The decision is being made by a prefrontal cortex that has nothing left, competing against a need that has been building since morning. The structure of the modern day almost guarantees this outcome, not because people lack discipline, but because the conditions at midnight are the worst possible conditions for exercising it. The cost is specific, and it compounds. The research on cumulative sleep debt reveals something more insidious than tiredness. Partial sleep loss reduces the functional connection between the amygdala and the medial prefrontal cortex, the pathway responsible for emotional regulation and rational assessment. A sleep-deprived brain shows increased reactivity to negative stimuli and reduced reactivity to positive ones. Decision-making shifts toward greater risk-taking and reduced impulse control. And critically, people consistently underestimate how impaired they are. They believe they're functioning normally while tests show significant degradation. Here's the irony that the research makes impossible to ignore. The sleep being sacrificed for autonomy is the sleep that would make tomorrow's day more tolerable. A rested day is easier to navigate. An easier day feels less like something being done to you. When a day feels less like something done to you, the autonomy deficit is smaller. When the autonomy deficit is smaller, the compensatory urgency at night is lower. The loop doesn't just repeat, it compounds. Tiredness makes everything harder. Everything being harder makes the day feel more like an external pressure. More external pressure means more autonomy, deprivation. More deprivation means a stronger pull toward midnight. The 332 hours lost per year aren't a neutral trade for 332 hours of reclaimed personal time. They're a debt that gets repaid with interest in every hour of every day that follows. And yet, 57% of people who do this say it was worth it. Not in denial, as an honest response from a system that got something real. The night genuinely provided what the day didn't. The problem is not that the night feels valuable. The problem is that the only way to access that value currently is to steal it from sleep. The behavioral research points towards something more structurally honest than a sleep hygiene rule. If the autonomy need goes unmet during the day and accumulates until midnight, the midnight behavior is a predictable outcome, not a personal failing. Attacking the behavior while leaving the deficit intact is the reason that strict bedtime rules work for a few nights and then quietly dissolve. The more accurate question isn't, how do I stop staying up late? It's, where in my day is there time that genuinely belongs to me? Not optimized time, not productive time, empty, unscheduled time, protected from obligation, even 20 minutes, used for something chosen rather than required. When autonomy is partially met during the day, the compensatory urgency at night diminishes, not because willpower increases, but because the need is less desperate. The second shift is about the tool. The phone being the default instrument of autonomy reclamation is a habit of convenience. It's always there, requires no preparation, delivers immediate reward. But the autonomy need doesn't specifically require a screen. It requires agency and something that feels like genuine pleasure. Those can be met by other means, without the variable reward mechanism that keeps the session open long past usefulness. There's a quieter realization somewhere inside all of this. The person at midnight scrolling through something they won't remember, staying up past exhaustion. They are not being irrational. They are trying to recover something real, something the day didn't give them. A few hours of existing on their own terms without someone else's deadline attached to it. The behavior makes sense. The need is legitimate. The only question the research raises is whether midnight is the only place it can be answered, or whether the day could be built to include, somewhere inside it, a version of what the night has been quietly offering all along. A day that feels even slightly like your own, that changes what midnight means.